At 3.5, Chandler is a boisterous, bright little boy who brings laughter and joy to his parents and sister. But there was a time in the not-so-distant past when this family was in danger of being ripped apart.
I was literally smelling him because I wasn't sure that we were going to get him back.
Chandler was born premature with a host of health problems, including a hole in his lung. He spent the first week of his life at the hospital. After he was released, his parents, Tara and Michael Crady, said they noticed one of his ankles felt strange and brought it up to a pediatrician.
And the next morning, we got a phone call saying, were you in a car accident? Was there some sort of trauma during your pregnancy? And I said no, and I said, why? And they said, well, it's a healed fracture, and it would date back to, in utero.
From there, it was back to OSF St. Francis for more testing. But what was supposed to be a routine follow-up x-ray quickly escalated as the Cradys were told Chandler had 14 healed fractures, including 12 along his ribs and spots of blood on his brain.
He said we called DCFS, and, either this is an injury or there's a medical issue.
Michael and Tara said they understood the hospital had a legal obligation to investigate, but were nonetheless shocked to find themselves accused.
You're hoping, praying that there is something wrong medically with your child. It's such a backwards feeling because you're sitting in the hospital and you're like, oh my gosh, they think we abused our child. Please let this test come back positive.
The Cradys say they were forced to stay at OSF under constant supervision for the next week, while DCFS called in a child abuse pediatrician, Dr. Channing Petrak, the medical director of the Pediatric Resource Center. In her report provided by the family, Dr. Petrak ruled the fractures and other injuries were suspicious of abuse.
I specifically asked the DCFS worker, are you going to take him? And she said that remains to be seen.
That's when Tara remembered the story of another mom featured in the Pekin Daily Times years ago who said she'd been falsely accused of child abuse by the same doctor.
While we were in the hospital, I contacted Michelle Widener, and she got me in contact with this radiologist out of Springfield. And by the grace of God, he met us at 6:30 at night at the hospital.
That doctor was David Ayub, a radiologist who specializes in these types of cases.
No question in my mind there were abnormal bones. The bones showed fragility.
From Chandler's x-rays and interviews with the family, Dr. Ayub determined Chandler had metabolic bone disease, possibly infantile rickets, and said the healed fractures that appeared on those x-rays dated back to in utero and or the birthing process.
If the ribs are weak at birth and the child passes through the birth canal, what happens is those ribs don't hold up, so they are pushed into the lung tissue with much greater force than they would otherwise.
Dr. Ayub said that would account for the punctured lung, noting other evidence he felt medically explained the other injuries described in Dr. Petrak's report. In all, the Cradys sought out a total of 8 medical experts, including a Boston University endocrinologist, Dr. Michael Hollick, who agreed with Ayub's findings and testified Chandler also likely had a collagen disorder called Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. Hollick said that would be enough to, quote, markedly increase the risk for fractures with normal handling. However, these are emerging theories that Ayub himself admits are not yet widely accepted in the medical community. We tried to talk to Dr. Petrak, but her employer, the University of Illinois College of Medicine of Peoria, told us, quote, because of patient confidentiality, we cannot comment on or provide patient information. However, they did connect us with another child abuse pediatrician out of Minnesota who was not affiliated with the Crady case, but disagrees with Hollick's and Ayub's theories in other cases like these.
To suggest that we have bones so weak that they fracture with routine care as a result of rickets with no other signs is not a logical conclusion.
Still, multiple experts for the family felt otherwise. That included a neurosurgeon from the University of Chicago who noted signs of old blood on the brain could have certainly been caused by the trauma of birth, given a condition Chandler was born with that left fluid between his skull and brain. Medical disputes aside, the Cradys said they tried to point to their good character, noting the frequency with which they'd been taking Chandler to the doctor for even the slightest ailment, including strange red spots that doctors since birth had been unable to diagnose. But when one of those spots reappeared early on in the DCFS investigation, the Cradys said a doctor called that in, and DCFS came knocking on their door in the middle of the night.
They called my brother and said, where's Chandler? We're looking for him. And because there's been the second hotline call, we need to know he's okay. And Ryan said, I can assure you he is fine. I'm looking at him.
Tara says their doctors later linked those spots to Chandler's collagen disorder. However, at the time, they were ordered to move in with her parents and could no longer be alone with their young son.
We feel like time was stolen. You know, those beautiful, nice first everything, we really weren't able to enjoy.
Still, the family continued to be proactive. They spent $25,000 on 6 different attorneys, including Tim McCarthy, who said he was quickly convinced of the family's innocence.
Once I met them and I started seeing the evidence, I thought, no, these people are not capable of abusing their child. They didn't do this. We need to get this resolved as quickly as we can.
McCarthy says the Cradys voluntarily took a polygraph test and passed, but it still didn't change the status of their case. That's when Michael says he considered more drastic measures.
I remember having a discussion with Tara and telling her there's too much against us. I told her I'm going to tell him I did it. I'll take the blame. You know, you can take care of the kids and. Sorry, it's, I was close. She talked me out of it.
Finally, they said they got a break in the form of a technicality when an attorney discovered that the initial judge to sign off at a preliminary hearing actually felt the state didn't show there was probable cause of abuse, a detail that was somehow previously overlooked in court paperwork.
Because of that, the law dictates that the case has to be dismissed.
And so it was, 10 months after the allegations were first made. But the Cradys say that wasn't the end, claiming DCFS kept the case open for a total of 693 days. Ultimately, they claim it was involvement from the Attorney General's office that brought their nightmare to an end. A representative from DCFS, who declined to go on camera, told us over the phone it was a, quote, difficult case, adding it was, quote, well argued on both sides, saying that as social workers, it is their job to protect children, and they're often presented with conflicting information. As for the Cradys, they say Chandler is doing well these days and that life is mostly back to normal.
I guess if there's a blessing in all of this is he has no idea that any of this happened. And as a parent, that is a very beautiful thing.
And they're not alone. There have been other headlines in the news in recent years of families who say they too have been wrongfully accused, including the Peoria mother who first helped the Cradys. Michelle Widener says her youngest son was just 5 weeks old, in the ICU fighting for his life due to a then undiagnosed genetic condition when it happened.
When they did the CT scan, he moved in the machine, which resulted in a blurred line, and that blurred line was misdiagnosed as a skull fracture. Our youngest son was born with a wide range of medical issues related to an undiagnosed rare genetic condition.
Peoria mom Michelle Widener says that led doctors at OSF St. Francis Medical Center to perform a CAT scan on the then 5-week-old, who she's asked we not name. But the outcome of that scan left Widener and her husband in utter disbelief.
When they did the CT scan, he moved in the machine, which resulted in a blurred line, and that blurred line was misdiagnosed as a skull fracture.
Unfortunately, the Wideners wouldn't learn there was an issue with the scan till much later. Instead, in that moment, they found themselves accused.
And the child abuse pediatrician told investigators that there was no other explanation than blunt force trauma.
That child abuse pediatrician was Dr. Channing Petrak, the medical director for the Pediatric Resource Center, and the same doctor involved in the Crady case. The Wideners say following the allegations of abuse, they were unable to be alone with their newborn son or their 2 older children for 2 weeks. During that time, they sought out a second opinion at the Cincinnati Children's Hospital.
They were able to decide with 100% accuracy that there was no skull fracture.
But it still took 3 months for DCFS to close the investigation, notifying the family the report of abuse was unfounded. Today, their youngest is 8 and is doing well, enjoying time with his 2 older brothers. And while he doesn't remember that dark time, his parents still do. However, it's prompted Michelle to fight for other families who are accused of abuse, now serving as the executive director of the newly formed Family Justice Resource Center.
Sometimes they get it wrong. And when they get it wrong, there is no recourse for parents. And the Family Justice Resource Center wants to be the place to turn when the state gets it wrong.
Also on the FJRC board, Diane Redleaf, an attorney out of Chicago. She's written a just-published book on the subject, profiling 6 families titled, "They Took the Kids Last Night: How the Child Protection System Puts Families at Risk."
The cases were all stories of families where the child welfare system came in and literally took the kids one night.
Redleaf estimates she's worked on anywhere from 70 to 100 cases involving families whose children allegedly had medical conditions that were mistaken for abuse.
I believe that any family could be subject to something like this, and people need to basically have a wake-up call that this is occurring.
Right now, the FJRC says they are handling 11 open cases across the state. But they say it's difficult to track how many allegations of child abuse are proven false, partly because no one keeps track of that. Redleaf and Widener also say many parents take plea deals or later say they were coerced into a confession. A Springfield father, Richard Britt, says that's what happened to him years ago. He recalls watching TV one night back in 2010 when his 3-month-old daughter, Sanaya, started gasping for air in her crib.
I just didn't know what to do. She was lifeless. She was still gasping, breathing very weird.
The little girl was transported to OSF in Peoria, where doctors determined she had bleeding on the brain, prompting Dr. Petrak to conclude Sanaya had been either shaken or hit. Britt says he protested and told staff seizures ran in his family. Ultimately, though, he was arrested and taken to the Sangamon County Jail after he claims he was coerced into a confession without an attorney present.
I didn't know what was happening. Again, I was 19, and they were just telling me that everything that I did was inaccurate, and it didn't answer their questions. I'm like, I'm not a doctor. I don't have answers for you.
Britt spent more than 2 years in that jail awaiting trial, where he was eventually found not guilty after a medical expert from out of state testified Sanaya did, in fact, suffer from a seizure disorder. Since then, he says he's rebuilt his life and enjoys time with Sanaya, who made a full recovery, along with her 3 sisters. But he says nothing can replace the time that was taken from him.
That's 2.5 years I'll never get back. I had to reestablish the relationships with my children. I don't know, man. I lost a lot.
Hoping to spare other families that fate, the FJRC says they want to help connect parents to medical experts with insight into diseases and conditions that mimic abuse. We asked one of the experts the FJRC uses, a radiologist out of Springfield, to weigh in on how this could be possible.
I think when you look at the specialty of child abuse pediatrics, you are geared up to protect children in harm's way. And so one of the first things you see, in other words, if you're, a nail, everything's a hammer, or vice versa, but it's one of the first things you think about.
Dr. David Ayub says he's studied metabolic bone disease, rickets, and vitamin D deficiencies extensively and believes those conditions can often mimic abuse. As a result, he testifies in cases all over the country. As we've previously stated, we've tried reaching out to Dr. Petrak for response, since she's the designated child abuse pediatrician in Central Illinois. But her employer, the University of Illinois College of Medicine, said they couldn't comment on or provide patient information, citing privacy concerns. But a fellow child abuse pediatrician out of Minnesota, who's unaffiliated with any of the local cases we've profiled, did speak to us.
Many of the theories that are proposed for alternate explanation for injuries are not accepted by really any of the major professional medical organizations.
Still, members of the Family Justice Resource Center say that's part of the problem, claiming many child abuse pediatricians are quick to dismiss other theories and have the final say if injuries are suspicious of abuse. Dr. Mark Hudson did confirm that child abuse pediatricians ultimately make that diagnosis, but he said they do first consult with other specialists. However, he also admitted that doctors can sometimes get it wrong.
Well, of course, with any medical diagnosis, there can be misdiagnosis. Most commonly, what we see in medicine is that abuse is missed.
That's a sentiment shared by the medical director for the Pediatric Emergency Department at OSF. Dr. Teresa Reish points out that healthcare workers are considered mandated reporters, meaning they're legally obligated to point out anything that's suspicious of abuse. She says not doing so can lead to fatal consequences in some cases.